Woo, we live. Calyx Boxing 2.0. Follow me on Twitter, Calyx Boxing 2. And we are fired up today. We are fired up. And they signaled that this was going to happen yesterday. And today it became official. And we knew that this was coming for September, but the Bivol fight put this in flux, right? We didn't know if it was going to be the Bivol rematch or if Canelo was going to go ahead with the originally scheduled fight with Golovkin in September, but now we know he's going along with the plan, and that's what I wanted to see as a fan because this is the fight that I've been wanting to see for a while. And I know there are detractors out there, and I will get to the detractors. I'm going to make my pitch, my official pitch for this fight, why it's a good fight, why it needs to happen, because I know there are people on the ledge, and I know there are hardcore detractors out there. And by the way, hit that like button as you come in. If you're not subscribed, subscribe to the channel. And Twitter's popping off right now, man. I've been getting a lot of impressions and followers on Twitter. So if you're not following me on Twitter, Calyx Boxing 2, because this is streaming on Twitter as well. And many of the people who watch my videos catch it in the archive. So as always, let me get this ring light correct. As always, if you're watching this in the archive, leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed and hit that like button. Let me get to some people already lined up. JC in the building. What's up? Shout out to JC. Shout out to OJ22, always in the building as well. Shout out to I Am Dwayne this time. Haven't seen you in a while, man. Good to see you again. GGG still tough fight. That is right. Salute to Off the Ropes Boxing and MMA as always. And already subbed. I appreciate that. And Marion Brown also in the building. Shout out to everybody leaving the comments, and I'll always get to the comments. But let me get to the fight. I don't want to get off my train of thoughts because there are three things to me that make a good big fight. Three things. One, public demand. You have to have public demand, right? There has to be public demand for a fight. The public must be demanding it. Look at the fight this weekend that's on pay-per-view. Tank versus Rolly. The reason that fight's not going to do well is the public didn't demand it. The reason that on pay-per-view anyway, Tank versus Matteo Barrios, Tank versus Isaac Cruz didn't do well on pay-per-view is there was no public demand for those fights. There was no public demand for it for many reasons, but one, there were no people calling for those fights, calling for those net matchups. Nobody was calling for Tank versus Rolly except Tank and Rolly. If they want to squabble together individually, go do that on the street corner or wherever, but don't charge me $74 for it. I don't want to watch it. So public demand, you have to have the public demand. Number two, entertainment value. And what do we know about this fight? It's going to have entertainment value. It's going to be a war. This is going to have entertainment value. Look at the first two fights. The first fight was a very good fight. The second fight got even better. It was a great fight. The third fight, I would argue, is going to be even better because the bad intentions, both guys want to put an exclamation point on this trilogy. And on top of that, Triple G is a little more shop-worn. And fighters who are a little more shop-worn, are a little past their prime, get more entertaining, actually. As the reflexes go, they're going to be looking to land bigger power shots. You're going to be loading up a little more. And I think that's what you're going to see here. And implications. There are implications for both fighters. And I'll get to those. But let me first get to these first 2 points. Every time, let me highlight first public demand. And this is my pitch for this fight. The reason there's public demand for this fight is Golovkin is a bigger name than anybody else that is being thrown out for Canelo sweepstakes. And I know a lot of boxing fans would rather see a fresh fight. But every single big poll that is put out there, every big poll that's put out there for both boxing fans and casual fans has Golovkin as the leading candidate to land the Canelo fight over everybody else by a lot, by a large margin. And there's a reason for that. Number one, it's because Golovkin is just a bigger household name than those guys. Casual fans know him. As much as we like for it to be true, casual fans don't really know Bivol, Beterbiev, Benavidez, at least not yet. Hopefully they do, but not yet. But they know Golovkin. So that's number one. Number two, he wouldn't be leading in these polls if Canelo put an end to this rivalry in the first two fights. And he just didn't. It's cloudy as to who won those two fights. There was a lot of controversy after those fights as to who won those fights. They won 24 rounds, and in my opinion, they were what and what with each other. It wasn't settled as to who is the better fighter. Now, greater fighter, Canelo is the greater fighter. Canelo has had a greater legacy, but better fighter, head-to-head, it hasn't been settled. It hasn't been settled. Let me get to some of these comments before I get to my next point. Shout out Annalie Jeremillo. Thank you for tuning in. Hola, Annie. Box Talk 101 in the building. Let's see what else we got here. OJ22, GGG versus Canelo will always be a close competitive fight. I wasn't asking for this fight, but I'll take it. I'm not complaining. And I'm going to get to that in a minute as far as how I think they match up stylistically and why I love this fight. And I'll throw out my Pacquiao versus Marquez 3 theory once again for people who haven't heard it. Didn't like the GGG fight at first, but it's a good fight now that Canelo lost. That's fair. That's fair. Shout out Yezer. Shout out Anna Lee once again. GG still tough fight, yes. But will he win at this age straight up? No. Will he win on the cards? No. What's the point? Hate to say it, GGG is a safe bounce back fight for Canelo. I would disagree with that. And let me talk about standards while you bring this up. And I'm glad you brought it up. Thanks for the comment. Is anybody else fights Golovkin? Like everybody wants to see they're throwing out 160 Charlo versus Golovkin, Andre versus Golovkin, Benavidez versus Canelo, or whatever. But any of these fighters, throw them out there. Let's say GGG Golovkin moves up to 168 and Benavidez fights him. Any of these other fighters, that's the best win on their career. And everybody would be praising those fighters if they fought them and especially if they beat them. Canelo does it, and it's like, oh, it's a good bounce back after a loss, right? Like it's a good comeback fight for him. Look at how the standards have changed, right? And this is my whole point when it comes to Canelo and these other guys is people tell on themselves. People tried to hold Benavidez. Charlo, Andre on the same level as Canelo, but in the very next sentence, they'll hold Canelo to much higher standards than these other fighters, right? For Canelo, this is a bounce back fight after a loss. Canelo, I even saw Malignaggi say it today. Like, it's good to see Canelo take this fight after a loss. Like it's easier. He always had it in his back pocket. The problem with the back pocket theory that Malignaggi threw out there, Malignaggi says something to the effect of he had it in his back pocket in case he lost. The problem with that is this fight was scheduled before the Bivol fight. They wanted this fight in September to begin with. So it was never a back pocket fight. This was the fight that they wanted. And it's the standards, right? They're holding Canelo to much higher standards. They want their cake and eat it too. They want to hold Canelo to much higher standards, but then they want to say that Canelo isn't much better than a Benavidez or a Charlo. And it just doesn't work. And by the way, and I put this tweet out there earlier, if your favorite fighter loses, that guy's going to be licking his wounds for 12 to 18 months. Canelo loses a tough fight to Bivol, the top guy at 175, and then 17 days later announces another pay-per-view fight. That's the difference. More and more I hear you break down the trilogy, I'm more convinced it's going to be epic, except Joe Habib. And I told Beeb last night, this is a good fight. Let's see what else we got. A close competitive fight that will end in a body shot, Nello in 10. I'm telling you this. Anybody who's going to bet on a stoppage in this fight, I'm telling you, you better be easy with that. From what I saw in the first two fights, I don't think either guy can stop each other. I just don't think they have it in them. Both guys have a granite chin. I think we're looking at another 12-round fight. So be careful with that. Be careful with that. If you think that this is going to be a stoppage, there'll be value there because Vegas is going to have a decision priced in here. Because I guarantee you Vegas does not see a stoppage here, and neither do I. Both guys have solid chins. I think this is going 12, and this is what makes this an interesting fight is if it goes 12, I understand people think that Canelo is going to have those scorecards already filled out from judges and all this stuff, but I'm telling you, Golovkin is going to win rounds here, and it's going to get interesting on the scorecards. It's going 12. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. That's what I'm saying, Haplo. Different standards. Solid cherry pick. I don't hate this fight, but I still want to see Charlo get knocked out. I just don't understand the cherry pick. When you say cherry pick, there's a loaded statement. A cherry pick is fighting a guy who can't beat you. Just an easy fight. That's not the case here. Anybody else at 160 and 168, they're saying, oh, he's fighting Golovkin. That's going to be a tough fight. For Canelo, it's a cherry pick. It's a cherry pick coming off of a loss, right? Don't know. Watch these narratives. If Canelo could have taken the Bivol rematch, the Triple G fight was in his back pocket. And the Bivol fight will always be there. And I have my theories on those as well. Bivol is going to be around for a long time. And 175 will always be there as well. But Canelo needs to finish the Golovkin business. He always has. He's had to finish this business. And I'm going to get to that as well. I don't have a favorite fighter. Never have I either. I don't have favorite styles, though. I like Winky Wright style. Paulie is in his prime. I wouldn't bet on a stoppage either. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't. Tougher opponent, GGG, Selecki, or Lemieux. That's what I'm saying. Charlo's over there fighting Selecki. Benavidez fought Lemieux. These guys are being praised. And they're being a little harsh on the ginger. Do you see how old his body looked in Japan? He looked good as the fight went on. But let me get to the second point, entertainment value. This fight has entertainment value. The first two fights were entertaining. These are two of the best action fighters in the sport. And if these guys were to fight 10 times, you would have 10 competitive, bloody wars, in my opinion. And once again, I'll throw out my theory. I think the narrative going in, from what I'm seeing, is Golovkin's well past his prime. Golovkin's not going to be the same guy at 168 that he was at 160 in his prime. Canelo's a different beast at 168. And Canelo, younger in his prime, is going to beat up on the older guy outside of his depth at a higher weight class in Gennady Golovkin. I'm seeing late stoppage. I'm seeing people say he's going to beat Golovkin 10 rounds. It's going to be a boxing lesson. I'm just telling y'all, I'm more of the thinking that we have something like a Pacquiao-Marquez theory going on. And I'm not saying Golovkin will beat Canelo. I'm definitely not saying that there'll be a fourth fight and Golovkin is going to knock out Canelo. But what I am saying is if you look at the narrative going into that third fight, Pacquiao versus Marquez, the narrative was Marquez can't fight at 147. Marquez is well past his prime. Pacquiao is in his prime. Pacquiao is a different beast at 147. So therefore, Pacquiao is going to destroy Marquez. And I know that was a narrative because on the YTBC back then, there were no lives. There were no long podcasts. It was all short form prediction videos at that time. And it was all post-fight videos. That's all YTBC basically was. And every prediction video I went to, including my own, had Pacquiao winning that fight easy going into the fight. And I was of the thinking that what I just said, that Pacquiao would run through Marquez in that third fight. Didn't happen. And it didn't happen because Pacquiao being in this weight class at this point in his career and Marquez being the outside of his weight class at this point in his career ended up being lazy, right? The truth was, if these guys fight 10 times, we'd have 10 competitive fights. The truth is, these guys were made for each other. You have certain guys who are just made for each other. It doesn't matter what point in the career they are. It doesn't matter what weight class they're in. They're made for each other. Canelo and Golovkin are made for each other, and they instinctively know that. Shout out my guy Remy. Calic's my guy. Shout out to Remy out there on the West Coast, I believe, with them old school cars. I need to cop one from you in about a year or two, man. I'll be in touch. But and appreciate the sticker, man. Definitely appreciate that. Appreciate all the support out there. But I'll just tell you, certain guys are made for each other, and Canelo and Golovkin are made for each other. And one of the reasons I know they are, and I know they instinctively know that, is Golovkin was not okay with how that ended in 2018. And that's why Golovkin was almost paralyzed in his career. He was just waiting for Canelo to come back around and point to him. And I criticize Golovkin for that. Although he did fight Derevyanchenko, although he did just unify against Murata, he did some things. But for the most part, his career was sort of paralyzed there. And it's because he wasn't all right with Canelo turning his back on him after that decision. And the reason I know Canelo knows this instinctively is because Canelo always knew. I just know it, man. Canelo always knew he was going to have to do this third fight. He always knew that Golovkin was still going to be around, whether 39 years old, 38 years old, or now 40 years old. And he was always going to have to do this trilogy fight for the fans. He sees the polls. He sees that the public demand is there. He sees that this is the biggest fight, arguably pay-per-view, that can be made in American boxing. I understand there are bigger fights that can be made out there. Fury versus Joshua, say Fury versus Usyk, maybe. A great pure fight would be Crawford versus Spence, is what we want to see. But this fight is going to do bigger pay-per-view numbers in America than those fights. That's just the truth, man. Watch it. Canelo versus Billy Joe Saunders did 73,000 fans in Jerry's World. What do you think this fight would do in Jerry's World? This fight would fill up any big stadium in Texas or Vegas. 75, 80,000 fans, I'm telling you. Even coming off of a loss for Canelo. And they're saying that this fight that he just did with Bivol did 550 to 600,000 pay-per-view buys. We have to take that with a grain of salt. We don't really know. There's no transparency when it comes to pay-per-view numbers anymore. But let's take it at face value. If that's the case, what do you think Canelo versus Triple G3 does as far as pay-per-view buys? It'll be up there. So one of the biggest pay-per-view, if not the biggest pay-per-view event in American boxing. Entertainment value, public demand. We go back to public demand. The public demand is there. And let me try to get back to some of these comments real quick before I get to implications. And that's the important thing I want to touch on, the implications, because I got a lot to say about that. So we're going to go a little long today. I feel Golovkin has been getting hurt to the body in the last few fights. Murata had him covering midsection. And if that is the case, if what you are seeing is true, then believe me, if anybody is going to expose the body, it's going to be Canelo. Gennady was coming off a long layoff versus Murata. He's coming back to look better, going to look better against Canelo. I agree. And that's one of the points I was telling people. It took him a little while, 3-4 rounds, to get back in his form against Murata. You saw him working through it. But when he did, it was back to old Golovkin, right? I don't understand how Canelo's chin is so good. It's crazy. I think if Bivol turned it up another gear, maybe it could have knocked him out. And that's the thing. Like, look at what Canelo has been through in his career. 11 rounds with Kovalev, 24 rounds with Golovkin. So that's, my math isn't great. 35 rounds with huge punchers, two of the biggest punchers between 160 and 175. And then on top of that, Bivol landed some clean flush shots against him for 12 rounds as well. Canelo's been in there with punchers. Canelo's been in there with every style, which is why he's become one of my favorites to watch. is he bounces back 17 days after a loss and says, "This is the fight we're doing. I'm announcing another pay-per-view." Any other fighter in boxing, I feel like 95% of them, they lose to Bivol the way Canelo lost to Bivol, they'd be gone for 12 to 18 months. Where's Caleb Plant right now? Where's Billy Joe Saunders right now? Where are these guys? When they lose, they disappear for a while. They start putting motivational quotes on Twitter. They're out there trying to find themselves spiritually, getting a million tattoos after a loss. Canelo's announcing a big, huge pay-per-view 17 days after he loses. That's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. See what my guy Haplo says. To be fair, just because Pacquiao Marquez came out that way doesn't mean this will. It could also look like Ray Leonard versus Duran 3 either is possible. And that's a fair comment. It's fair. All I'm saying is I think there's a lot of parallels there. I think there's a lot of parallels there when it comes to Pacquiao versus Marquez. That's the first thing that I thought of when I thought of this fight. It's like, I don't know, man. It just feels to me, sometimes I just get those feelings and sometimes they're wrong. But when my intuition on big things, I feel like is right most of the times. And my intuition here is this ain't going to be an easy fight for Canelo. I think anybody who's looking forward to seeing what Canelo is going to do in November, December, I think anybody out there right now saying that this is a cherry pick for Canelo after a loss, I ain't buying it. I ain't buying it. I don't think Canelo should be looking past this fight. I don't think Canelo is. And I don't think Canelo fans should be. And I don't think the boxing world should be looking past this fight. This is an incredible fight. It's going to be a war. And if Canelo gets past this, props to him. The problem with setting it up the way people are setting it up is they're setting it up this way for a reason. They're setting it up to say this was a cherry pick for Canelo. So, of course, he looked good against Golovkin. Golovkin was old anyway, right? Canelo was looking for a cherry pick after the loss. That's what they're trying to set it up for. Is if Canelo, it's how you have to be able to read the stitches on a fastball when it comes to Canelo detractors. They do these things for a reason. My theory last week was Benavidez and Andre don't really have a lot of fans on the internet. They just use these guys as tools to demean and devalue Golovkin and Canelo, because the only time you hear Benavidez and Andre's name is when it comes to Canelo and Golovkin. And it's my same theory here is they set this up as a no-win situation for Canelo. If he wins the fight, he was supposed to win the fight, right? But if he loses the fight, he lost to a 40-year-old. Oh, he lost to a has-been. He has 2 straight losses. That's what they're setting this up as. Canelo versus Golovkin, 3 pointless styles are always be competitive. No matter what happened in September doesn't mean one is better than the other. It does. Better and greater are 2 different things. So the winner of this fight to me will be seen as the better fighter. Like you could argue Bivol beat Canelo head to head. He's the better fighter, but greater is a much different thing. Boxing is littered with fighter A beating fighter B, but fighter B is greater because fighter B had the greater legacy overall. I would argue that Pacquiao is greater than Mayweather, even though Mayweather was better. Mayweather won head to head, but I look at what Pacquiao did throughout his career. And it's the same thing in these instances. Bivol beats Canelo. I would never argue that Bivol is a greater fighter than Canelo. Canelo has put together a great resume against many different styles, and he's been active. I'd argue he's greater. And that'd be an easy argument. Even if Golovkin wins this 3rd fight, I can say head-to-head Golovkin's better, but Canelo is still greater. Golovkin is too late in his career to catch up to all the accomplishments that Canelo has had in his career. First fight was a little boring to me, but the second one was a classic. I think when people say the first fight was boring, they were expecting a great fight. And I felt like it fell a little short of that. The first fight was really good. And then the second fight, you're right, was classic. This reminds me more of Ray versus Duran 3, 2 fights in rapid succession and 1 years later. That's another good point by Haplo. GGG is a monster. He's now 40, though I can definitely see Canelo stopping him to the body. And I think he could possibly hurt Golovkin to the body, but I just don't see either. I don't envision a scenario in which either guy stops each other. I just don't. And if Canelo stops Golovkin, woo, and puts an end to that trilogy like that, I don't care how old Golovkin is. What an exclamation point that would be. And it would add to Canelo's already storied career. And notice what I do there. I give the winner full credit. Full credit. To be honest, Golovkin had good reasons to think he was always the better fighter than Canelo. This fight will happen in Vegas, and I am there. I was asking Steve Kim earlier, where is this? Because I know he's got insider information. He said he thinks it'll happen in Vegas, but he's not sure yet. But I think it will happen in Vegas, and I am there no matter where it happens. Vegas, Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, I'm there. Don't care. I see this. Antarctica, I'm there. I see this well-deserved tune-up for Canelo. He has fought 4 times in a year against champs. He lost handedly against Bivol. Give the old man Triple G his final payday and send him off. More on that in a minute. I got a lot to say about implications. AJ Wilder would do big numbers. It wouldn't here. It wouldn't here pay-per-view buys. AJ Wilder's not a big pay-per-view here. It would be huge over in the UK, not here, as far as pay-per-view buys. Those numbers will be up there just like the numbers of different hats you got. I got a bunch of hats. It will definitely be an action-packed fight. There's no doubt. That's what I was talking about with entertainment value, likely a Canelo TKO. I'm starting to get a lot of that, and I think people are overlooking this. Lemieux is much better than Selecki, I think. That's debatable at this point in his career. We're talking about Lemieux at 168, and we're talking about injury-prone later in his career Lemieux. So that's hard to say. Either way, it's not a good look for those guys to be fighting those type of guys at this point in their career. I think it's best for Canelo to defend his titles at 168 versus Triple G, then Benavidez in December or May, then revisit 175 possibly, depending on Beterbiev versus Smith and Bivol. And what's interesting about that is I would agree. I want to see Canelo stick his heels in at 168, dig in the sand, and start defending his territory at 168. And I want to see Bivol go about his business at 175. Like I said, the Bivol fight's always going to be there because I think Bivol's got a long reign on his hands at 175. I just don't see that guy losing to anybody at 175 right now. And there are names. However, we look at, I talk about reading the stitches on the fastball and sort of reading the landscape. I saw earlier that they're working on a possible, I believe a top-ranking Matchroom are working on a possible fight between the winner of Beterbiev and Joe Smith Jr. against Yardy at 175. So what that tells me is they're not talking about undisputed between the Beterbiev, Joe Smith Jr. and Bivol after that fight. And what that tells me is they anticipate Canelo turning around after the Golovkin fight and possibly fighting Bivol again in the rematch in November or December, earlier than later, if I'm reading between the lines. I hope that's not true. I would rather see Canelo go on about his business and leave the Bivol fight for now. I just think there are better fights for both guys, and I think Bivol is all wrong for Canelo at this point. But I'd still be tuned in for that rematch as well. But I don't want to look past this fight because I think it's more dangerous for Canelo than people are saying. Will Canelo still bring same style? Like throw one punch at a time, throw everything with power, wide punches, not cutting the ring. He needs the volume and change speed. I think we're going to see more of the same of what we saw from both these guys in the first 2 fights, to be honest, except more aggressive. I think they're going to both be more aggressive, which is why I think this is going to be the best fight of the trilogy. I'd expect Benavidez to do that to both middleweights. I think Benavidez would beat Canelo. That's also fair, subjective and fair. I think Golovkin was always better than Canelo, possibly. Like I said, it's always is a difference between better and greater. Better and greater. Better and greater. That's what I'm saying there. Going to be a good fight as long as it lasts. They won't give Canelo credit. They won't. They won't give Canelo credit. And they'll even try to demean Golovkin if he wins. Oh, Canelo's coming off of a loss. Nah. They'll find ways Trust me, they find ways all the time to demean, devalue Canelo and Golovkin. They hold these guys to bigger standards, higher standards than the other guys at 160 and 168. Telling you, I'm telling you. It would be big in the U.S. That's for sure, AJ and Wilder. That would be, and believe me, that's a fight I want to see. I've been calling for that one for, a year now? GGG is 40, guys. His best chance to actually win was 2-3 years ago, possibly. But it's still going to be a good fight. He's Queensberry. There you go. But they're talking about that fight between Yarde and the winner between Beterbiev and Joe Smith Jr., which tells me that Bivol may not be in the equation because they're waiting around to see if Canelo turns around for the Bivol fight. And I think he will. I think he's going to fight Bivol sooner than later if he gets past this fight. And then for the people calling for Benavidez, you have to understand that Canelo is busy with the DAZN stuff right now. And then once 2023 rolls around, that's when Benavidez comes into play, when Al Heyman does what he does with the PBC. He holds divisions hostage. He builds up his pawns being Benavidez in this case, 160, soon to be 168 Charlo, soon to be PBC fighter, it looks like, Boo Boo Andrade, Morrell Jr. He's going to hold these guys hostage and bring them to the table in 2023 to try to land the Kingpin Canelo to a multi-fight deal with the PBC. So you people who think delusionally, in my opinion, that we're going to see fights like Benavidez versus Charlo, Andrade versus Charlo, Andrade versus Benavidez, I'm telling you. And I've had people say that PBC has to do this because they're going to lose their television. I'm telling you, I've been hearing this for 7-8 years about PBC being in trouble, PBC losing money, and yet they still do the same thing. Al Heyman is stacking his deck, and he's going to bring it to the table in 2023 to Canelo and say, look, this is the multi-fight deal I got for you. Look at all the guys I got. He's not going to put these guys in danger right now. He's just not. All these guys are going to have light touches until 2023 when Canelo comes back to the table, and hopefully Canelo points to them. That's what they're thinking. I'm telling you, that's what's going to happen. Yes, Yarde is mandatory for Beterbiev versus Smith. Yarde is, and I saw earlier that Zach Parker is a mandatory. Zach Parker is the WBO mandatory for Canelo, but Canelo has 18 months to fight that mandatory, is what people need to realize. And WBO cleared that up today. So that's a mandatory. If Canelo sticks around and continues to defend 4 belts, he has time to do that with the mandatories. He has 18 months from the Caleb Plant fight last year to defend against a Zach Parker. So keep that stuff in mind. And also keep in mind that if these mandatories come into play and bigger fights are in play, Canelo's not going to go with the mandatory. And if the WBO decides to strip Canelo for not fighting Zach Parker, Canelo's just going to let the belt go. It's expensive defending 4 belts at one time. Ask Josh Taylor. Josh Taylor said he paid 11% of his purse on sanctioning fees defending 4 belts. It's just not sustainable in boxing to defend undisputed over and over and over again. It's not sustainable. Boxing doesn't make it that way. The sanctioning bodies don't make it that way. And bigger fighters can negotiate smaller percentages on sanctioning fees. And I best believe Canelo has done that, but it's a smaller percentage on a much bigger purse. We're talking about $55 million. So it's an expensive tab to continue to defend 4 belts simultaneously which is why I was actually surprised to see Canelo defend all 4 belts against Golovkin at 168. This is going to be an undisputed fight. More on that in a minute after I get to some of these comments. I don't think Yarde can beat Smith or Beterbiev. I don't think so either. I was certainly no Canelo hater. I just think Golovkin was better overall. What's good, West Side in the building. Boo Boo needs to move to PBC. At least there he can get a solid trio of fights. I agree with that. As a fan of the sport, it's amazing. The critics of Canelo can't name one fighter who unified a whole division against undefeated champions, then moves up against arguably the best at 175. WTF. And I'm WTF in that as well. I agree those PBC matchups are a joke. They're deliberately keeping them away from each other. That is true. Shoe shine in the building. This weekend main events were all soft touches except for Bootsai. Yep. That against Richard. Bootsy. I always butcher his name against Richards, which was a good fight. And Richards was the underdog, almost pulled that fight off. But they were all wide odds this past weekend, which is frustrating to see. Do you think the WBC will franchise Canelo? Possibly. Look, the WBC is going to do what Canelo says. The WBC and Canelo have a good relationship, and that's why, like I tell people, it's good for Benavidez to have the WBC mandatory in his bag, just to have it, just in case, just something to hang his hat on. But these people who think that just because Benavidez has that's going to leverage him into a Canelo fight, they got another thing coming. Like the WBC is going to mandate Canelo versus Benavidez when Canelo signals to them that it's okay to mandate that. When the boxing world demands Canelo versus Benavidez, that's when Canelo's going to signal that he's going to fight Benavidez, and that's when the WBC is going to react to that and mandate that fight. That's what's going to happen. So that's to the WBC mandatory folks, the people who think that that's such a big deal for Benavidez to have the WBC mandatory. And it was a good move for him to fight for the WBC mandatory. Don't mistake me. It's not his fault that the WBC had Lemieux as number 2. Benavidez was just going through the motions there and did what he was supposed to do. It is what it is. But implications. This was the main point I wanted to touch on today. And this is when it gets good. What are the implications on this fight? It's a trilogy fight. That's number 1. Both guys are looking for separation. Neither guy created separation in the first 2 fights. And this is why the public is demanding this fight. We go back to point number 1. There's demand for it. The polls. The boxing public, both hardcore fans and casual, want to see this fight. More so casual, but even boxing hardcore fans want to see it despite what they let on and despite what they say. So they want to see this fight. And one of the reasons they do is separation. What makes this one of the many things that makes this matchup great is both guys need to put an exclamation point and create separation with each other in this third fight. There's going to be a lot of urgency between both these guys, which is why I think it'll be a great fight, is both guys are going to be sitting on punches more. Both guys are going to be more aggressive. Both guys want to end this. Both guys are tired of each other. Canelo's tired of being mentioned with Golovkin. Golovkin is tired of people saying that he didn't want to fight against Canelo. Separation. It's a true trilogy fight because the first 2 fights were not only entertaining, but there was no separation created between either guy. I would argue 24 rounds. If you score 24 rounds like it's one big fight, I think it's 12-12. I don't think there was any separation created by either fighter. Neither guy was able to knock the other out. Both guys had claims for several rounds in both fights, several swing rounds, which made both fights debatable. I would say debatable, not controversial. There's a difference. Both fights were debatable. Like I said, it's a trilogy. Here's another point. Let's go with Canelo first. Why this fight is important to Canelo off the bat is he doesn't want 2 straight losses. The perception of that is just bad. Forget that tough fight with Bivol moving up to 175, and then you bounce back 4 months later when, like I said, a lot of guys would stay away for 12 to 18 months, lick their chops. Not lick their chops, but lick their wounds. Canelo doesn't do that. He bounces back with another tough fight 4 months later. But forget that because it's the 0 losses mentality. It's the every time a guy loses, he's exposed mentality of the boxing world. And it's frustrating. It's frustrated me for a while because I'd rather guys who test themselves. I want guys who test themselves. I don't want guys who fight once a year against average opposition and say, oh, look at my beautiful O over here. It's not what I want. I want guys testing themselves. But the perception, and perception can be everything. The perception is 2 straight losses. Your career is starting to go on a tailspin. So Canelo's fighting against that, first of all. Second, I already brought this up. He wants to separate himself from Golovkin. I guarantee you Canelo is just tired of hearing about Golovkin. He's tired of hearing about how the first fight was controversial and Golovkin deserved that victory. He doesn't like that draw on his record. He doesn't like that in the second fight, he went to end that foolishness and he couldn't create separation once again. He got the victory, but you still had a lot of people in the boxing world saying, I thought Golovkin won that fight. That's debatable. Canelo is sick and tired of it. So the implications of separating himself from Golovkin finally ending any discussion we have as to who is the better fighter. There's also those implications. Belts. Another implication here. Belts. What did I just say? It's not sustainable to defend all 4 belts simultaneously when you get them, which is why I believe the only, and somebody can fact check me on this in the comments section, but I think the only fighter to become undisputed by beating the undisputed champion is Jermaine Taylor against Bernard Hopkins. And somebody can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but I think that's the case. And one of the reasons that's the case is, 1, it's tough to beat an undisputed champion, but 2, and by the way, Catterall almost just pulled that off with Josh Taylor. Should have. But one of the other reasons is it's not sustainable to defend all 4 belts at once because of all the politics that come with it, and also with the sanctioning fees, the oppressive sanctioning fees that these sanctioning bodies place on you. So not only are you paying 1 sanctioning fee, 2, 3, you're paying 4 sanctioning fees at once. It's a big tab. So it's not sustainable. So you have this on the line. All 4 belts. Canelo's putting all 4 belts on the line in this fight. So think about that. Everything that matters at 168 is at stake in this fight. That's how I look at undisputed. Like any trophy that matters in that weight class is in the winner's trophy case. So when we say the winner of Kambosos versus Haney is undisputed champion, nobody in that division can make a claim. It's silly to say Tank Davis is a champion at 135 because he's simply not a champion at 135. He's a trinket holder. That's a Reggie belt. That's a JV belt. The ones that matter are being fought between Kambosos and Haney. And the ones that matter at 168 are being fought between Canelo and Golovkin. Canelo is graciously, because he is a gracious champion, putting all his belts on the line against Golovkin. Implications. Belts. They all are on the line here. So whoever wins is the undisputed champion. The champion at 168. Let's get to a couple comments before I get to Golovkin's implications. Room rates for Vegas are already skyrocketing for September date, and it's not official yet for site location. And I expected that to happen. And I expect flights to be crazy as well. But guess what? Not letting it stop me. Not letting us. Can you imagine if Canelo loses back-to-back fights? Where does Canelo go from there? Canelo keeps moving. I'm telling you, like Canelo's one of those dudes. He's going to keep moving. He's going to keep moving. He's going to say, I lost a fight. It can't end this way. And he's going to keep moving. He's a different breed. Like, that's what I'm trying to tell people. Like, Canelo's a different breed, man. He's a different breed. Other fighters wouldn't have 3 fights set up. Other fighters wouldn't have the audacity to look past the Dimitri Bivol, which worked against him, but to already schedule a Golovkin, already schedule a fight in December, but he does it and then he sticks to it after the loss and announces a pay-per-view 17 days later. They're both tired of each other. That is true. Perception is, what was that? Let me get to that comment. perception is not reality, despite the saying. I agree, but narratives get moved off of perception, and they grow legs, and that's frustrating. Only one of these dudes ended up in the hospital. Canelo beating 40-year-old Golovkin does not make him the better fighter. I don't know, man. I don't necessarily agree with that. Great breakdown, but who will you be rooting for, Calix? Chicano trying to put me on the spot. You know what I'm rooting for, Chicano? I'm rooting for a great fight. I'm rooting for a great fight. Go check out Chicano Prophet El Chile, and thanks for this, man. But I'm rooting for a great fight. I am. Like, I've tried to explain this to people, because when you try to call things down the middle and you don't play to the extremes, and then you're not a fan of fighters, it can be tough, because you can be seen one day as a hater and then another day as a super fan. Like, I get that. I got that last week with David Benavidez. I'm a Benavidez hater for saying that the Lemieux fight is no value, and then I'm on his nuts, as people say, for saying he looked great in the fight. That he looks great, that he passed the eye test. When you call it down the middle, it's tough. You get it from both sides, but I'm not a fan of fighters. I'm a fan of the actions of the fighters. And I enjoy the actions of both these fighters as their careers have gone on. I enjoy what Canelo gives me, like good fight after good fight, entertaining fight after entertaining fight, good matchups against multiple different styles, so I can see who Canelo really is. That's the point. Like, he's not hiding anything from me. He's transparent as a fighter. He's fought movers. He's fought punchers. He's fought defensive fighters. He's fought counter punchers. He's fought offensive output fighters. He's fought pressure fighters. Like, he's given me all kind of different matchups the past decade, and he's done it against top fighters at the same time, and he stayed active. He stayed consistent. How am I not going to like that? So who am I? Like, why would I not like the dude just for not liking the dude if he's giving me what I want as a fan? That's what I don't get. Like, I feel like a lot of fans pick out their favorite fighter based off of substance, like not substance, but I don't know, they might pick him because of nationality or skin color or whatever it may be. And fine, if that's what you want to, I'm not mad at that. But what I'm saying is, it's more sustainable and you can be more consistent if you just like fighters for their actions. And I like Canelo for his actions, man. Like, I don't see anything to not like about this dude. I think if you're hating on this dude at this time, you're nitpicking. You're just trying to find stuff. And the same thing with Golovkin. Like, I don't understand why people can't keep it real when it comes to Golovkin. I don't understand that. Like, the dude was clearly ducked for a while. He had two lineal champions who wouldn't fight him at middleweight, Sergio Martinez and my guy Miguel Cotto, and that pains me to say, but Cotto wanted no part of him. Cotto forgot English when Golovkin's name would be brought up. It's got to keep it real. Then Canelo finally comes around being Canelo. He says, I'm the lineal champion. I have to fight the top guy. And he did. Props to Canelo. Golovkin has wins on his resume. He just unified against Murata. He beat Derevyanchenko. He beat Danny Jacobs. He arguably beat Canelo once, possibly twice when you talk to people, but he fought Canelo twice. When he was being avoided, let's say avoided, earlier on in his career, he had wins against decent middleweights like Lemieux, Murray, Gil. I don't know what these guys have to do, man, but different standards, as I said. But let me talk on Golovkin real quick. His implications, exclamation point victory. Once again, separation. It's a trilogy. He's tired of hearing that he never beat Canelo. He's tired of, I never got that victory officially on my resume. He's tired of hearing it, I'm telling you. It's the reason he never moved on. Yes, he fought Derevyanchenko. Yes, he fought Murata, but there was a lot of, he was paralyzed for a while. From 2018 till present day, he was paralyzed for a while. And that's because he never moved on. He was like, it's like the girlfriend who broke up with you. She's a dime. She can cook. She's got a great job. You don't move on when she breaks up with you. And so when Canelo got that decision, turned his back on Golovkin and said, go do what you do, I'm going to do what I do. Golovkin was not all right with that. Golovkin was checking his text messages. He was looking at his Facebook feed, stalking Canelo. Like that was happening. And I'm a Golovkin guy. Like I like Golovkin. Once again, like I like his actions. But it is what it is. Like he was paralyzed for a while. He didn't know how to move on from the Canelo loss in the second fight, and he never moved on. He just didn't. Nobody's more excited in the boxing world right now than Gennady Golovkin now that this fight is official. But he's tired of hearing that I never beat Canelo. He's tired of looking at BoxRec and seeing draw and loss next to Canelo's names. Tired of it. He's looking for separation. He wants to put an exclamation point on his career by beating Canelo and ending this trilogy and saying, I'm the better fighter. That's what Golovkin wants. That's his implications. On top of that, every belt is on the line, as I said. Every belt's on the line. So now you have a guy at 40 years old who unified at 160 and, oh, by the way, moving up to 168 and can become undisputed in the same year. So think about that. 2 super fights in a year, made a ton of money to fight Murata, will make even more to fight Canelo. 2 super fights. It was a super fight in Japan against Murata, made big money, and a unification fight at 160. Now he's in a super fight back in America for all the belts undisputed at 168. If he wins this fight, he's possibly fighter of the year at 40 years old. Think about that. That's what Golovkin's looking at. Implications. And by the way, this reminds me of something. To the Golovkin haters. This is for the Golovkin haters. For years, I heard that Golovkin needs to move up to 168. Needs to move up to 168. There are better fights up there. Guys want to fight him, even though guys at 168 were not eager. Believe me, my guy Carl Froch, he forgot English too when Golovkin's name was brought up. But for years, I heard Golovkin needs to move up to 168. Golovkin needs to move up to 168. Golovkin needs to move up to 168. There are 2 pathways you can go when you're ducked in a weight class, right? You can go move up a weight, take the Paul Williams route, move up a weight class, move up maybe even 2 weight classes. That way you can give up some of your strengths in order to get guys who are bigger into the ring with you, guys with bigger names who are bigger than you. There's the second route, which Golovkin took, and that's stay busy, fight every 3, 4, 5 months, fight 3 times per year, possibly 4 times per year. Stay busy, mow guys down, give people highlight reel KOs until the big fight comes to you. And it did for Canelo. And that's the route Golovkin took. And Golovkin should not be criticized for that. And on top of that, you guys act like you need to fight multiple different weight classes to be a great fighter now. And that's not the case. Boxing history is littered with guys who fought in one weight class throughout their career and are still considered great fighters, all-time great fighters. Just go look it up. So you don't have to fight in multiple different weight classes. But now since Golovkin is doing what you wanted him to do, for years you said Golovkin needs to move up in weight. Now Golovkin is moving up in weight to fight the biggest name in boxing, a guy who is somewhere on the pound-for-pound list, even coming off of a loss, a guy who is the biggest name in boxing, and for all 4 belts in the weight class. And then you have these same people who will tell you, oh, Canelo should stay at middleweight and fight guys like Charlo or Janibek for the king of Kazakhstan to see who the king of Kazakhstan is. He should fight Andre at 160. He should fight Munguia at 160. So your career, I see you guys. I see what you do. You move the goalposts. That's what you do. When you don't like a fighter, you move the goalposts. This guy is moving up in weight, what you've wanted him to do for a decade. You've been yelling from the rooftops, from the mountaintops, for this guy to move up in weight. He moves up in weight for the biggest fight in boxing and does it with all 4 belts on the line for undisputed. And it's, this guy. He should stay at middleweight. I see you. I see what you're doing. It's moving goalposts once again. And you do it with Canelo and Golovkin all the time. Y'all are constantly moving goalposts, different standards. Any other fighter does this, moves up from 160 to 168 and fights Canelo, fights for all the belts. It's, oh my God, look what he's doing. This is the second coming of Jesus. Golovkin does it. It's, Canelo defends against Golovkin. Any other guy fights Golovkin. It's a great fight. It's the best fight on their resume. Canelo does it. It's, cherry pick. I see y'all. I see what you're doing. You're moving goalposts because you simply don't like the fighter. And this is why you're not consistent. You're not consistent because different standards for different fighters. And it's different standards for different fighters. And it's so shallow, the reasons why. It's so shallow. You simply don't like the guy, this guy or that guy, because they come from a different part of the world. They speak a different language, or they look different than you, or you just don't like them for whatever reason. But the reason is shallow, and it's sad to see, because a lot of these channels could be good otherwise. A lot of this content could be good otherwise if you just kept it consistent. And it's easy to keep it consistent if you just get the hate out of your heart. Different breed. I don't remember who I was talking about with different breed, JC. Yeah, I agree. Canelo is a different breed. He's a throwback fighter. He is. He is. I would say that Canelo a different breed. Then I'm a fanboy. Touche, touche. I'm not picking a winner. I'm going to pick a winner. I'm going to make a prediction, Chicano, but I'm not telling you who I want to win, because I want both guys to win. And that's just not going to happen. But I want a great fight. Both Canelo Golovkin fights are overrated. Not very exciting, to be honest. Different strokes for different folks. Both of them will be motivated. Canelo can't afford another loss. I appreciate both fighters often, but I think it's natural to root for one over the other. Yeah, it could be. It could be. He fought plumbers. God. Imagine if they draw. That would be hilarious. If they draw, that would be hilarious. Who's got a better resume than Canelo? That's a whole different show, and I could go hours on that one. Cotto ducked the F out of him. He did, and I'm a Cotto guy, and that's what I'm saying, man. Like, you got to keep it real. Guys that I like Gotti. I knew he wasn't going to beat Mayweather. I know he didn't belong in there with Mayweather. Cotto ducked. Cotto was my guy. He ducked Canelo. He ducked Canelo at middleweight. He just did. He was my guy. Cotto weight drained people. It is what it is. You gotta be able to keep it real. It's not saying that these guys aren't great fighters, but everybody has their thing, right? Everybody has their thing. Golovkin, like I said, he could have went a different route after the second Canelo fight, but he got a little paralyzed there. He did not like that Canelo moved on. Golovkin was holding back the hey big head. Yes, he was. He wanted to say that so bad. I never wanted you anyway, right? Those things we do when the hot chick breaks up with us, right? The homecoming queen breaks up with you. What do you do? What do you do? Block her on Facebook. Say you never loved her anyway. You don't want to see the photos of the homecoming queen with another guy after she broke up with you. It's going to break your heart. You log on to Facebook at 10, 11 o'clock at night. You see that her Facebook status changed from single to in a relationship, and you just start crying. That was Golovkin after Canelo moved on and started signing other fights. I got to be honest. But we're back to where we belonged, right? This fight had to happen. The trilogy had to happen, guys. It had to happen. It was inevitable. There are things that are just inevitable. And this was one. Canelo was always going to circle back to this fight at some point. Golovkin was always going to be there when the homecoming queen called him back. Right? He acted like he wasn't going to be by the phone, right? Like he wasn't waiting for that phone call. But when the homecoming queen calls, you pick up. You pick up always. Spence needs to move to 154. These new age boxing fans are weird. That is true. Can sleep easy knowing GGG did duck him, and that's not true. Golovkin did not duck. That's already been debunked a million times. Factoids. Got you good, bro. Let's see what we got. Hate is bad for the soul. It is. Cotto Mayweather was a classic. It was. That was a great fight. I had Cotto winning 4 rounds off of it, but Mayweather obviously separated himself as the fight went on. But it was. And some people would say it wasn't. But everybody expected Mayweather to blow through Cotto, including Mayweather. And he didn't. Cotto had some good rounds in that fight. But that's how high the bar is for Mayweather, right? Like you win 3-4 rounds off of Mayweather. It's like, oh, that was a great fight. That's how high the bar is for Mayweather. And that's where we talk about standards, right? Canelo, Golovkin, Mayweather, like these guys have different standards because they've earned those standards. They make more money in fairness. And with the higher standards, as Haplo said earlier, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Do you think it was going to be a better fight when they had it signed before COVID, or now that Golovkin has the confidence Canelo lost? As far as a better fight, I don't know, because Golovkin's older now, right? So go either way. I just think that a lot of times things work out for the best. A lot of the times timing ends up perfect, is what we say about Crawford versus Spence, right? Like we've been waiting for Crawford versus Spence for years, and we've been demanding it for years. But it feels like both of them coming off of career best victories, it's happening at the right time. The timing is actually perfect for it. I didn't feel that way from Mayweather Pacquiao. That was well over marinated. But fights like that and fights like this one, I think the trilogy is coming at the right time for both guys. I think it's coming at the right time with both guys. But once again, man, like I just don't understand the hate for these guys. Chicano Prophet summed it up best. Hate's bad for the heart. You shouldn't hate on people just to hate on people. Detractors is a different story. There are plenty of reasons to be a detractor of certain fighters. So Canelo deserves some of that. Golovkin deserves some of that. Nobody is perfect. Like I said earlier, when it came to Cotto, everybody has their things, right? Everybody has their flaws. But when it comes to overall just hating on a guy for shallow reasons and hurting your consistency because of it, it's sad to see. And once again, like the Golovkin thing, when it comes to the weight class, it bothers me. It bothers me for years because these guys for years said Golovkin needs to move up. Golovkin needs to move up in weight. Golovkin needs to move up in weight. He needs to move up to 168 and chase bigger fights. Now that Golovkin's moving up to 168 and chasing bigger fights, we've got, Golovkin needs to stay at 160 and fight Munguia and Charlo and Andre. Imagine that. Imagine turning down an undisputed fight at 168 against the biggest draw in boxing and what is the biggest pay-per-view event in boxing, today stay down at 160 just to please these idiots who are always going to move the goalposts. They're always going to move the goalposts for people that they hate. Hate's bad for the heart, and it's transparent. We see it, and I see you. You constantly moving the goalposts for guys like Canelo and Golovkin. You're doing it here. For years, you said you wanted him to move up in weight class, and he's doing that. And now you want him to stay in his weight class. I see you. I see what you're doing. You just don't like Golovkin for whatever reason. You just don't like him. And hate is bad for the heart. He's doing what you wanted him to do. And at 160, being avoided, he had 2 routes to take. Either move up to 168, 175, give up some of his strengths, or defend, fight at 160 every 4 or 5 months, 3 times per year against the best opposition that will come to the table. Do it in impressive fashion. Give us highlight reel KO after highlight reel KO until the big fight comes to him at 160. The lineal champion and Sergio Martinez didn't fight him. The lineal champion and Miguel Cotto didn't fight him. Finally, the alpha dog, Canelo, fought him as a lineal champion, and we got top 2 in middleweight for the first time in years. And we still haven't gotten it since. And now he's moving up to fight undisputed at 168, and you want him to stay at 160. When he was at 160, you want him to move up to 168. When he's moving up to 168, you want him to stay at 160. I see you. I see what you're doing. That's moving goalposts, and hate is bad for the heart. I'm new to the channel, Callie, but I like to set up props to the channel B, and make sure to hit that sub button. Some of the best boxing talk, and I appreciate y'all tuning in. And this is a daily thing, man. Monday through Friday, you got the podcast if YouTube doesn't take them down, because that's been happening. Like I said, hate's bad for the heart, and I think I got somebody flagging me for no reason, and I'm not able to appeal because YouTube is bad. But I'm here every day dropping content. I'm also on Twitter every day at CalixBoxing2 dropping content, and Twitter's been popping off. And the website is coming soon, within the couple days, because I have to have somewhere to drop these videos if YouTube goes down. So I'm always here. Hit that sub button. Hit the like button. If you're watching the archives, comment below. I appreciate y'all. But one thing to take from this in closing is a great matchup needs 3 things. A big fight that's great needs 3 things: public demand, entertainment value, and implications. This fight gives you all 3 of those things. On that note, man, as always, God bless.